Hey, good morning. Happy Sabbath. It's a big privilege to be here with you today worshiping at the Mount Pleasant Seventh-day Adventist Church. It's wonderful. It's been almost a year since I was here last time. And I'd just like to bring you greetings from a few places I've been visiting not so long ago. I returned not so long ago from a trip to Europe collecting mission stories. I visited 9 countries to collect stories. I started off in Poland. And then I went from Poland to Latvia, and from Latvia to Germany. From Germany, I went to Portugal, and then to Spain, and then to Romania, and then to Serbia, and then to Montenegro, and finally to Italy. And I can just tell you that God is doing wonderful things throughout Europe now, too. And in just a week from now, not tomorrow, but the next Sunday, I will fly to Africa to collect some mission stories. I plan to go to Cameroon, then to Ghana, and then to Guinea. So hopefully I will be able to return one time and tell you what I heard there. But just want to say that God is alive and well and doing amazing things throughout the world. The Adventist Church is growing bit by bit as the Holy Spirit works on people's hearts. And I'd like to tell you a story today as our special feature from Poland, where I was at during this recent trip. In Poland, there was a man named Christopher. Christopher was invited by his wife to go to some evangelistic meetings. And his wife said that at the meetings, the preacher showed a little clip, a small video at every presentation. And Christopher went mostly to see that small video. He wanted to see what was going to be shown. And at this meeting, the preacher did not show any videos. And Christopher was really unhappy. He was very disappointed, and in fact, by the time the meeting ended, he was very angry. And when he went home, he was furious. And he yelled at his wife, and he cursed her. And for his wife, that was the last straw. She said, "I'm going to leave tomorrow. I'm taking the kids, and we're not coming back." That night before going to bed, the wife looked at Christopher and said, with great pity in her eyes, "Christopher, I don't think you have ever once prayed to God during our marriage. You really need to talk to God. Only He can change your heart." That night, Christopher could not sleep. And around midnight or so, he got up and went to the kitchen. And he sat down at the table, and he began to talk to God. He said, "God, I don't know if you exist, but you know I'm a really bad man. I'm mean to my wife. I'm mean to our 3 kids. I drink. I can't do anything about this. But if you exist, if you are alive, could you please change me?" And Christopher talked to God for about 30 minutes, and he didn't receive any reply. In the morning, Christopher got up as usual to go to work. He got on the bus. And on the bus, he met some of his friends from work, and they began to talk as usual. And as usual, his friends were cursing a lot as they talked. And this was normal, but this particular morning, Christopher did not like hearing those bad words. And Christopher thought, "What's wrong with me?" At work, everybody pooled their money together to get drinks after work as usual. And as always, Christopher gave some money for the drinks. But after work, he did not join them to drink as usual. Instead, he went straight home. And as he went home, he prayed and said, "God, please stop my wife." When he got home, he found his wife there with the bags packed, ready to walk out the door with the kids. And he said to her, "Honey, please give me another chance. Let's have a new start." His wife looked at him and said, "Okay, let's try." That evening, Christopher went back with his wife to the meetings. And Christopher went to the preacher after the meetings and said to the preacher, "You know, my wife wants to get baptized this Friday. I want to be baptized with her." And as he said that, Christopher was smoking his cigarette. And the preacher looked at Christopher and he thought, "What do I say? If I refuse, he probably will never again ask for baptism in his whole life. What would Jesus do?" Christopher said, I know I'm smoking right now, but if you baptize me, I promise I will never smoke again. On Friday, Christopher came to the meetings. He came to be baptized. And the pastor, the preacher again, looked at Christopher and thought, what do I do? Christopher said, preacher, I want to tell you, I haven't smoked all day. The preacher decided to take a risk, and he baptized Christopher with his wife. When they got home, the wife was very happy. She said, I'm so happy. I've always wondered to myself, when was the happiest day of my life? Was my happiest day when we met? Was it when we got married? Was it when we gave birth to our first child? No, my happiest day is today when I gave my heart to Jesus, and you did too. The preacher wondered, I met the preacher, so I heard the story from him. He wondered to himself, what would happen next with Christopher? He didn't have long to wait, because a short time later, Christopher came to him and said, you know, preacher, I had a really bad youth. I got into trouble with the law a lot of times, and I want to do something now to help other young people who are in trouble with the law. Let's go to a youth prison and preach to the prisoners. The preacher thought to himself, what do I do? The preacher had been raised in an Adventist family. He had never associated with troubled young men. He had no idea what to say to them. And Christopher said, don't worry. I will talk to the prison warden and arrange for the visit. So Christopher and the preacher went to the prison and met with the warden. The warden was very kind, but very firm and very direct. He said, look, you have one chance. If the prisoners don't like your sermon, if they tell you not to come back, you're not going to be invited to come back here again. The preacher said to me, he began to really pray then. What do I say to these guys? Not long after that, Christopher and the preacher returned to the prison. They were taken to a big hall, and a lot of young men, all wearing the same clothes, came in. They had very bored looks on their faces. And when the preacher saw these young men, he knew he had to change his sermon right away. So he got up to speak like I'm standing here right now, and he said to these young men, you're wondering probably why I'm here today. I'm here today because of him. And the preacher pointed to Christopher. Christopher, get up and tell us something about yourself. So Christopher got up and he spoke to the young men and he said, I once was here. I once was living here in the very same prison as you are here today. I had gotten in trouble with the law. I did a lot of bad things. I made a lot of mistakes. And I even nearly died. And Christopher showed his wrists where there had been slashes from a razor. But Christopher said, someone saved my life. I'm here to tell you today that someone is ready to save your lives too. This is not the end for you. You have hope. You can get out of here and make one of two decisions. You can leave here and return to your life of crime, or you can accept Jesus and leave here with him and have a new life with him. I urge you today to choose the new path with Jesus. After that, the preacher and Christopher returned to the prison many times to give many more sermons to the inmates. And in fact, one time, a national Polish television crew came with them and filmed them as they went around the prison. And the reporters with the television crew talked with the inmates, interviewed them, and asked them what they thought about the preacher and Christopher. And these young men said, we are so grateful to the Seventh-day Adventists. We are so glad that they came here to our prison, that they have introduced us to the Bible. They have taught us about Jesus, about forgiveness, about his love, about his mercy, and about how we do have hope. We do not have to live like we lived before. We can live new lives with Christ. And when the preacher and Christopher heard this, they were very happy. The preacher, his name is Ryszard Yanukovych. He said to me he was really glad that when he heard these words, because he knew then that God had a purpose for Christopher being baptized. God had a purpose for coming to that prison. And that purpose was that God changes hearts. Amen. My friends, God does not want us to have the hearts that we had this morning when we came to church even. He wants to keep changing our hearts into his likeness, into being the kind of people that he wants us to be. And I invite you today to have hope. We can have the heart of God.